All right. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for jumping on. Glad to be with you. I'm Tyler Williams. I'm an agronomist with ForGround by Bayer. I'm here with Will Danby, operational meteorologist with BAM Weather. And today, really, we're kind of just going to go through a little bit of the spring planting outlook and even headed into early summer. And as you know, we try to position a lot of these from the through the lens of folks that are doing cover crops and reduced tillage and kind of the angle and nuances that come with some of those farming practices. So we're happy to have BAM Weather kind of helping us out with this, and appreciate Will for jumping on today and really kind of going through some of that forecast for us. So Will, thanks for jumping in. I appreciate you being here. I'll kind of kick it over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Tyler. I greatly appreciate spending some time here with you guys and kind of sharing some of our knowledge here. And as always, kind of fusing together the meteorology side of things and the agriculture side of things and kind of just combining like ideas there. So let's go ahead and jump into this here. I'm going to kind of start things off with our main overall pattern progression. And you're going to hear me use the term a lot, El Nino into La Nina. And before we get into a La Nina, we have to go through a neutral phase. And what is all this talk here? El Nino, La Nina, neutral. It's simply these areas, these black boxes in the bottom left, the bottom right corners here that we're monitoring. And these are sea surface temperature anomalies. And I tried to make it a point here that kind of the last time we issued one of these outlooks, it was towards the end of January. And the bottom left image here is where we were at that time on January 31st. And note we have got very warm waters here in both of these rectangles. And the bottom right image here is where we have been as of March 30th. So this is very recent, and the important thing to note is this far rightmost box. Notice these green and blue hues. That's below normal sea surface temperatures. And what happens here, almost like a pump, is when we get out of this El Nino into a La Nina, is first the far eastern waters cool, and that spreads from east to west. And so this is indicative of indeed, yes, we are now in a waning El Nino. We are still in an El Nino, but very indicative here that these are kind of the stages that we're going through, that this is decaying. And this middle image right here would be the assessment. It's a modeling of when we can get out of this El Nino and eventually into a La Nina. It does arrive eventually, but I think it's more so into the summer. And in my opinion, I feel realistically, I think as early as July, we can be starting to feel the effects of a weak La Nina. And that's going to have profound implications here on how our growing season is going to progress. So that's kind of going to be the main overarching theme here for how our pattern driver progresses throughout the United States for our growing season. And these are just the short-term weeks 1, week 2 outlooks for each geographical location. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this here, as we're kind of mainly going over more of the CONUS view, getting into the growing season here, kicking that off, and where do we go from starting in April. So the first thing I want us to address here is where we have been this past winter. Now, this is something for myself, I'm a little bit more novice in this research. I've been working in line here with Brett Waltz. He's very knowledgeable in this kind of field. This is more of his research here. I've done some of it a little bit myself, but we look at where we've been over the past winter, and we need to think of this as a bank, a storage of how we can work into the summer months. And the concern here is the areas where we're the deepest brown. Those are drier soils, and I'm talking your darker colors. I think your lighter tan colors were okay, but it's these darker colors across northern Wisconsin, Michigan, and eastern portions of the ag belt here into the Ohio Valley, that these are some very dry soils. And the problem is, in the winter, as I was saying, this is more like a bank, a storage. If we get moist in the winter, that carries on into the spring and the summer. We can retain some of that soil moisture, and with water, this gets a little scientific here with heat capacity. Water does have a better ability to conserve your temperatures. And so where we have more moist soils, this will help to moderate the pattern better. And my concern would be these darker colors. These can dry out quicker for one, and for two, they can pose a concern for drought. And I think that's going to be an issue earlier on in this season. I'll touch up on that here in just a second. But ultimately, what we can do is we can use this aridity index from November 30th, really the start of winter, up until the end of March. And generally, these can correlate to how things will progress into the growing season. Now, I included the growing trend line here from past years for corn. And I want us to note that a lot of our analog years fall right around that trend line, if not slightly above. So it's important to note here with where we're going, I'm not sounding the alarm for all panic on the growing season here. There is support from our analogs that this would suggest that we're closer to a normal trend line, if not a little bit above. And then these bottom right images here are just a few of these years that have some striking similarities. And you can see our other aridity indexes are from, or indices here are from 2021, 16, 98, 95, 92, and 87. And a lot of these years you're going to find are good analog years as we progress into the spring months.
So Will, I got a quick question on that aridity index, what you're looking at. So those darker brown areas, I mean, is that direct correlation to soil moisture? I mean, is that primarily what that's telling us?
I would call it a cousin to it. It's very close. So at least for right now, the aridity, this is close to current soil moisture. So yes, these areas are drier, but I like to look at this as like your bank storage here. So if you're already drier in these spots, my concern would be is if you get a hotter and drier stretch, we don't have moisture in that soil already, and so it can be very quick and easy to heat these places up because there's no or not as much water retention. So at least kind of going off of that as well, going to quickly couple the drought monitor with this. This is recent as of the 26th of March. Areas where there's some concern for continued drought, we would have to look towards Wisconsin and in through Michigan, and more so the Great Lakes areas here. This is where I think things can deteriorate somewhat, and I think things can be a little bit rough at times for southern Minnesota and northeastern Iowa. Now, the benefit to this here is, at least for right now into early April, I do think we can start to work some of this deficit away, and that is ideal to start planting. And this is the past 8-week drought change. You can see these places in Iowa, southern Minnesota, those are very, very dense for corn growth. These have started to improve. So again, I don't think all hope is lost here. I think we can see really the short term right now, at least through mid to late April, this can help us work in some moisture overall. The areas I have some concern for degradation are going to be Wisconsin, Michigan. I'd say eastern or far eastern Indiana, more so into Ohio, kind of those very far eastern ag belt regions of some concern. And then I know down here in the deep south, there's a lot of cotton production. I do think the beginning of the growing season here for cotton is going to be very beneficial. I think we do stay active here, and we have really worked significantly throughout these winter months to erode really that drought that got very severe there back in August and September, that has now since diminished for us, fortunately. So kind of with that, I'm going to go into the majority of April here, mid to late April temperature and precipitation outlook. The main pattern driver in this is going to be our tropical convection. It's called MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. Without getting too technical there, it's just an area where we have increased thunderstorm activity along the equator, and that has a pretty direct correlation to how it influences our pattern here in the United States. And overall, it's a warmer outlook. So places there where that drought is starting to improve across Iowa, portions of the Ag Belt, It will be a lot warmer, and it will be, I think, more active, especially into about the mid-April timeframe. So again, I do think really out of the gate here, things will be very favorable for growing, as well as throughout the South, the deep South there, for our cotton production. It's as we get into the end of April, I'm going to kind of pivot things here to watch for any frost or freeze concerns. And where things can get interesting is, I noted in the text here, I do think if there's a risk to cool off here, the East Coast has a cooler risk to get into the end of the month. That's also more nested in that tropical thunderstorm activity, that MJO I was talking about. And yes, while the pattern overall is going to be warmer than normal, my concern here is behind some of these frontal systems, there can be still some sneaky freeze threats. The areas in blue here would be spots we'd have to watch, I'd say, getting into late April, early May. I think on average here, the risk is that this can occur potentially about 5 to 10 days later than a normal typical freeze. The areas in red here, the beige colors, I think we can see an earlier last freeze. So that means things are going to be a little bit milder for us, as I think more of that core of that warmth can have a better opportunity at residing across these locations. So where do we go now from here to the end of April? The areas that are highlighted in blue here, additional freeze is going to be likely. And as I was talking about with that moisture, especially into week 3 of April, we are going to get some pretty favorable planting conditions with it being warmer right now. So I do think, again, things kick-starting into the season. I think for a lot of us, the growing season will start off very well. And then kind of as a whole here, this is pretty closely mirrored to that this is our weeks 3-4 outlook here. And you can see they're very similar between just the overall April monthly outlook and the precipitation outlook. And again, the concern would be as we get to the end of April, starting to dry things off across the East Coast, areas across Wisconsin and Michigan. And this is going to be something that's gradual. I think based off of us going from a weak El Nino into a neutral phase here, that things slowly start to dry out and gradually warm up as we get into late April and into May. And here's just a look at our favorite analogs. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on these either. This is just kind of combining, hey, there is validity in some of our research here. We're not just kind of pulling things out of nowhere. Can clearly see a lot warmer across the northern plains, northern tier of the U.S., cooler across the Southwest. Now, I think that the extent of some of this dryness, it's not seeing this flow pattern very well through the central U.S., so I do think things are wetter across Missouri, portions of western Missouri here. But things where we can get drier would be towards mid-Atlantic, again, Great Lakes regions there for April. And then going to kind of just progress here kind of month by month from there as we start to get into May. I think, in my opinion, from an El Nino to neutral to La Nina point of view, I think this is going to be a very good pure month where we feel a neutral state. We're not in either an El Nino or a La Nina. And I think there are some similarities to what happened last year, especially across the Great Lakes, where things got quite dry for some time there. It was actually the reverse is what happened here. We came from a weakening La Nina into eventually an El Nino, and May of last year saw us in that same transition phase. So that causes some concerns there early on here for Michigan and Wisconsin to be drier. I do still think we hold on to a cooler than normal, wetter flow pattern through the central U.S. And that's going to be pretty favorable, especially for the plains areas such as Nebraska, Kansas, and areas of Missouri there that need that moisture to kickstart the growing season here. Yes, things could be a little bit cooler than normal, but overall, I think the moisture is going to be more important for us, and we can see that flow happen through those areas there.
So Will, just thinking about that one there, and a lot of field work happens in the month of May, kind of especially across the Corn Belt region. We can talk to maybe that below normal temperature map and what sort of the what that looks like. I mean, is it something where we think we're just going to get dramatic temperature fluctuations and just overall ends up being below normal? Do you think it's going to be a pretty steady state, just kind of maybe some clouds, wet, and just kind of lingering on? I don't know if you have any indication of what that might look like.
Absolutely, yeah. So while the extent of this below normal is pretty expansive, notes our forecast notes a warmer Midwest. I think some of that warmth can creep down there as a risk there and throughout Iowa, portions of the northern Ohio Valley. But as a whole, and I'm going to go ahead and show the analogs here. It's not oppressive cold. I think, to be honest, kind of the areas through the central U.S., it would be more of a slightly below normal. I don't think this is a case where we get very notorious and strong and unseasonable cold outbursts. And again, here's kind of the thinking, the support there. We can see that flow pattern kind of right through the central U.S. for precipitation, and where we do see that precipitation, it's a little bit cooler there. We can kind of see how these correlate almost 1-to-1 for us, where we're drier across the Great Lakes, we're a little bit warmer there, and I can say the risk would be that some of this warmth can get pulled down a little bit more into portions of the Ohio Valley here. And then let's go ahead now and jump into June. Now, I think the issue here is confidence in the precipitation is quite low. Again, it's going to be nested in how quickly we can feel a La Nina-like atmosphere versus lingering more into a neutral phase. I'm more in conjunction or in line with thinking we hold on to more of a neutral outlook into June. Now, fortunately, I do have high confidence in the temperature outlook. I think there's not much of a difference no matter how you looked at more of a neutral state to a weak Nina state. I think there's above normal confidence that the Great Lakes, eastern 2/3 of the United States is going to be warm throughout June or above normal. And as a matter of fact, here some of our analogs are quite warm there, especially into July. I think July could have potential to be one of the warmer Julys we've seen in 3 or 4 decades here. But areas where we can stay cooler would be kind of along the West Coast areas. And again, that kind of lines up with where things would be a little bit more active. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take the drawing tool out for this. My concern where things get a little bit lower confidence in June is how much can this flow pattern protrude over the top here, or if that does happen, do we get more of a high pressure that sets up over the Great Lakes, and we start to work in a flow pattern instead that works more like this, and this high pressure that sits up here ends up cutting off precipitation. I think those are some risks to discuss here, and I'll have more information on that in just 1 second on the next slide. And certainly here's what the precipitation outlooks look like there, and there is a hint at trying to see some of a flow pattern through the Ohio Valley, portions of the southeast here. Now here's a look at those temperatures again. I think it's pretty safe and sound to say that this is going to be a pretty warm month for us across a lot of the areas where we're just growing in general. The reason why I opted to leave this as a much below normal across the Northeast and the Ohio Valley or kind of the northern parts of the Ohio Valley is, if you can get that flow pattern through the southern part of the U.S. here, I still think it's going to shunt precipitation off to the north and east here. And so I have some concerns, no matter how we look at the risks, that those locations would end up being the most below normal. And here's a look now at where things get a little bit more technical. This middle image here would be a solution if we can feel a more rapid La Nina, and that did happen in 98, 07, and 2010. And those were very wet across the ag belt. Now, look at what happened if we delay things. The smaller image in the top left, look at how dry it is if we feel more of that neutral state there, especially across the Northeast. Now, That's more my favored image is the small one in the top left. I think the larger one in the middle and the JJA forecast risk. This is more of a risk. So I think we need to lean on the more side that we're drier. And that's just going to be the concern there that I was mentioning, and that's nested as well with kind of going back to the beginning of the presentation, some of that aridity index, the aridity research there, that there's just going to be concern again. I think early on here that the greatest dryness concerns are going to be off the bat into May and early June. Now, here's how we kind of combine June, July, and August as a composite. You can see the core of that most above normal temperatures is across the Ag Belt, the Ohio Valley, portions of the Great Lakes there. Only small locations there across the West Coast would be below normal. I think the risk would be Southwest can work in some cooler temperatures here. And then overall with the precipitation, again, I think with this June, July, August, it'd be June and July where we start off drier with the below normals. But then I think late July, August, things can get more active as that La Nina comes more to life here. I do think there is a flow pattern that still is persistent through the central U.S. where we have that above normal precipitation. I think that part is a little bit more of a signature that we can expect to see here. And then here's kind of, without getting too far ahead of myself, this is some of the research we're looking at with, May and June across the eastern ag belt, that things start off dry. And then as we get into the end here, July, August, things can start to saturate a little bit more and get a little more wet. Now, I think it would be more of a late July into August where things start to saturate and get more wet. And the thing is with that is that's typically when we get the hottest. And so if we are getting wetter when it is hot, then that can be a good recipe here for overall yields in our growing season. And here is kind of how I'm going to close things off here is with this July temperature and precipitation outlook. Again, the confidence is above normal, in my opinion, for much above normal temperatures here across the eastern third of the U.S. Unfortunately, my confidence is quite low in this July precipitation map. Now, here's my general idea with this. I think this is where drawing this out can be very helpful for us. Overall, my concern is we get high pressure that sets up here. I'm going to denote this with an H. And I think we get a secondary high that sets up across the southeast U.S. And the flow around these high pressure systems, they spin clockwise. And so my concern would be if this is spinning clockwise here, again, precipitation gets shunted. And if we have another high that sits through this way that also has your clockwise flow, I think you can try to work in what's called some return flow. So we can try to get some precipitation along the East Coast. And I think what happens is this flow on the southwest side of this high comes up into the south central U.S. This is Gulf Stream moisture. So the general idea is I do think we can work in some flow up the central U.S. And then we can see this below normal across the northwest here. I think we also work in some kind of a flow up the northern plains. But the problem again is if this high pressure becomes more established, I think we can have a difficult time trying to press some moisture into that area throughout July. So a little bit technical here, surely, but there is a visual here. There is a method to try to see this as we roll through into July. And that's really where I'm going to kind of end things off here. Here's kind of the overall analogs that tries to see that there are warmer temperatures, again, without a doubt here. And then here's, again, the analogs are a little bit wetter up here in July. My opinion is this would occur later in the month into August. This may be a little bit premature. It's just low confidence right now across kind of the northern areas of our growing regions for corn there, across southern Minnesota, northern portions of Iowa.
Yeah, so Will, I'm trying to think, right, kind of the progression of the time here, just thinking kind of through April, into May, July, and then, thinking August. And, growers that are growing cover crops in particular are concerned right now on when to terminate it. And I didn't see anything in there that just looked like we were going to get some sort of solid, steady state pattern to just stick in and stay. And so I guess from an agronomic perspective, I like to think or like to talk to growers about, when to terminate those cover crops. I think about a couple things. One, do you have enough moisture? Do you have time to let it grow? Obviously, we want to let it grow as long as we can, because that's the only way we're going to get any benefit. But then the concern is you're going to terminate it, and all of a sudden it's going to use up too much moisture, and it's going to just turn hot and dry. And so a lot of that concern comes probably in July or June and July on making sure there's enough moisture still there. So if I'm looking at this right, the June and July precipitation is maybe a little mixed, but you have pretty good confidence in the temperature patterns. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, again, no matter how you slice it up here, if we hold on to more of a neutral feel or we start to propel more into a quicker weak La Nina, both of those analogs across the board are overwhelmingly a lot warmer. And there's just support for that. And I don't have really any reasoning to defer from that or think otherwise with it. Just the problem with the precipitation is I think we know the general synoptic pattern. It's just the problem is where exactly does it set up? Where does that high pressure try to set up across the Great Lakes, and how strong is it? And how much does that work in conjunction with the warmer temperatures? And overall, the kind of tying it all together, the reason why I think there is kind of such concern there through the Great Lakes areas is when you look at where that aridity has been from. So if the soil's already dry there, it makes it much easier to build a heat dome or a high pressure dome over those areas, because again, those soils can dry out quicker. There's not a whole lot of moisture to begin with to retain things and to kind of put a lid on activity and coverage.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, there's a lot to piece out there for sure. And so then maybe one last question. And anytime I see sort of deep cool below normal in the West Coast and kind of warmer in the East Coast, that I live in the plains, and in June that always strikes me as severe weather. Do you have any talking points around kind of severe weather? Anything you can say this far out?
I think if anything, if you do have that flow up the central U.S., I do think severe weather can occur across those locations. Especially, let me kind of pull up this July map here. If you're getting a combination of some flow here up the central U.S., and you kind of have that northern path of that trough or low pressure, cooler temperatures up the northwest, Pacific Northwest, I think you can get a conjunction there of some uplift across the central U.S. that certainly can pose some threats for severe weather. And the other thing I would note too is if you can start to feel some of that wetter risk there. Let me go back to this idea. I know a lot of us talk about derechos and those damaging straight line winds. If this can verify, I do think there can be a concern across these areas that we can get some derechos. That the problem again is just how does that synoptic setup lock in here? There's that southeast coastal high I was talking about here. Where does that go, and can we get some flow in through there? My concern would be if this high pressure off the East Coast can kind of set up a little more interior to the U.S., this most certainly can cause issues up the Central Plains. And I do think there'd be more of an elevated risk, certainly as you get into June and July, for trying to see some severe weather. And what's important to remember is you can still be below normal with precipitation, but still be above normal with severe weather. And a lot of the patterns where we can get straight line damaging winds and derechos is they live and they thrive off of these boundaries where they set up. If you get a high pressure that sets up there in the southern U.S., you can get a system that just kind of feeds off that boundary, and it's the juice for it, and it keeps it going. So that's something important not to forget. I do think those areas would be at risk of seeing some increased severe weather. That's an excellent question.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks for doing this for us, for doing it for the farmers is always interesting to look at. And I know this time of the year, weather plays just a critical role every single day on what can happen. How when you can spray, when you can get out there and plant. Every single thing seems to be influenced by the weather, especially as we head into the spring. So, yeah, all these are good, great talking points. And I don't know if you have anything else that you'd like to add?
I don't have too much. I would say I think in terms of kind of the lower confidence on that precip in June and July, I think it will become a little more evident with increasing confidence as we get more towards about early May. I think we got to give it still about a month or so and continue to see how this El Nino or La Nina progress, or how quickly we get out of that El Nino. I mean, we definitely are getting out of it. It's just how quick that happens.
Yeah, that'll be quite interesting to see how that plays out. 'Cause it felt like we jumped into a lot El Nino really fast last year, and all of a sudden we're just going to head right back out really fast. And La Ninas, at least in a large portion of the growing region, strike a little fear into the mind of people. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. So as we kind of wrap up, what's a great way, or where can people come find more of what all that you do, and if they have more specific weather related questions, where might be a good spot to send them?
Yeah, so there's kind of two spots you can go to if you're more interested for just BAM weather's ag reports or commodity reports. We do those. You can just go to bamwx.com, visit our website, and we have a top bar there. You can see kind of our commodity page and our ag page for both energy and agriculture. Those are very helpful to folks. And then we have our own platform. It's called Clarity Weather. That is it's a paid service, but with that as well, it offers very hyper focused long range products that looks at about the next 3 to 4 weeks progression. I think those are very helpful to farmers that need some more of that detailed option. And then I'll also have that ability too on our platform that you can ask us any questions. We have a chat feature on there. So if you're ever out there in the field, you can't take rain, or you need rain, or can I get some extended dry windows? Those are all things we can help aid you guys and answer for you guys there. And at the end of the day, that's really what we care about here, is just helping you guys out in any way possible. It's awesome that we can live out our passion every day here and share that with you guys, and it's just awesome when those two things can clash together.
Great, yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, and people can reach out if they want any of their info. Here at ForGround, we'll continue to bring you regular updates with our friends at BAM, and try to really tie in that agronomic info that helps the farmer in the day to day. So thanks, Will, appreciate it. You all have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler.